Welcome to the Fandom Fighters Podcast, Episode 3. I am Fern, and I am joined today with my friend Toby.
It's me, I'm Toby. I don't say much in the first two episodes. I realized that after listening back and editing them, I get so lost in hearing these stories that unless I'm specifically asked a question, I don't say much. So I'm going to try to be more active in the conversation without interrupting the story too much these times. We'll see how it goes.
It could be a lot to process, just being like, oh, that exists?
Yeah, and this, looking at the show notes for today, within the first, 3 sentences, what the fuck is going on now?
Especially the way I worded it.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that are just I breeze through and one true God shows up and relationship delusional. There's a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of stuff today.
So today's episode there's a bit of a story behind outlining today's episode. I don't know if we want to keep this in, but I'm just gonna say it. I originally was just researching the Snape Wives. And in researching for the Snape Wives episode, I just discovered so much new stuff that had to do with the topic, and so I restructured this entire episode because it was so fascinating, and I haven't heard of a lot of this stuff. So this was relatively new to me too. I had encountered it, but I hadn't fully gone down the rabbit hole into what everything meant. So this was a fun one. I
mean, we're titling this one the Snape Wives,
mm-hmm.
but it's a lot more. It's like a catch-all for the rest of it. Because I don't even know what you would call this.
Yeah.
It's like the parasocial relationships, but it's not
mm-hmm.
with a content creator. It's with fictional characters, which I guess are parasocial, but yeah, it's so odd.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know how I get it. I've seen people that are like this, and I used to make fun of people like this in my
mm-hmm.
shittier days, and I still probably would, honestly. I'll make fun of them in my own head and be like, man, you're weird, but I won't say it out loud anymore, kind of thing.
Right.
Okay, so let's dive in, because this starts in a weird spot and it finishes in a weirder spot.
Yes, and so I want a couple disclaimers. One, as with every topic on this podcast, I am not doing this to make fun of any group of people. I don't want to point at these people and be like, what a bunch of weirdos, because, everybody's a weirdo. Everybody has one thing that other people would probably make fun of them for. And people have reasons behind their weirdness, so I just love the weirdness, and I think it's really interesting, and I like thinking about maybe why somebody would be drawn to this. And second disclaimer is that this episode talks about religion. I don't think it'll be too heavy, but if that's something that you're not interested in or something that might upset you, then I would skip this episode.
Yeah, we'll save the very heavy religion stuff for the D&D podcast, because that's our whole first season is going to be super religion focused. Thankfully, I found a way without spoiling anything for that. If you listen to the other podcasts that we make, Morningwood Presents, I found a way to balance religion is bad with religion's not bad. If that makes any sense to people, it's going to be a good time. But
I'm so excited for that.
I'm pumped. This is gonna get. I think we start recording that on. We might do it Saturday. We might do it next Saturday. I haven't decided yet, but I'll let everybody know. All right. So let's start with the Battle of Hogwarts.
Yeah. So okay. First, I'm going to pose a question, and that is. No, let me rephrase this. Hold on. I don't want to just be like, "Are you religious?"
Oh yeah.
So. From what I know about you, Toby, I think we're kind of similar in that we're not explicitly religious, but like a lot of people our age, I think we kind of unavoidably get into some spiritualism.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. I used to be a hardcore atheist in my edgy teens and 20s. Yeah. And then I started thinking about it, and I got into the phase of my life where I'm like, man, the sun's a fucking nuclear explosion happening all the time. And signals that travel between galaxies, when you look at them at the right point of view, might actually just be like weird space neurons. So I don't know
Right.
like what the fuck's going on, and I'm just gonna play video games anymore.
Right. Like, who cares? Believe what you want. There's problematic elements to probably every religion, but
Exactly. And like a little background, I have a bag of runes that I every day when I wake up, or like not right when I wake up, but at some point before I like get started with my day, I pull out a rune and I look at what the meaning of it is. And like, man, how can I apply this to my day? It's not like trying to decide. It's such a weird one because it's not like the inherent use of runes as people would understand them. It's more like I pulled
right.
a random rune out of this bag. What does that mean, and how can I apply it to my day? I've taken my own twist on it. So
Yeah,
that's
and
like,
that's something I like about certain aspects of religion and spiritualism is you can make them so personal to yourself and give it whatever meaning you like. And for me, especially, I think it can be sort of like a safe way to reflect on my own like mental health and well-being. It's almost like a type of self-care for
yeah.
me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was even thinking of starting to like journal like what the rune I pull out is and how I feel that day, so I can look back and say, okay, how am I going through this? But I as I've talked about, I don't know if we talked about this in the first couple episodes, but I want to be like a creative writer, but I can't sit down and write out things. I can only like make lists, and then
Mm.
the second I try to
Yeah.
actually sit down and connect the points, I'm like, I am bored. I can't do this.
Right. Like our brains don't work like
Yeah,
that with
but
ADHD.
I'm an orator, so like I love telling stories, and I love like coming up with
Mhm.
stories on the fly, like in D&D and stuff. I just can't sit down and write them out. It's
Yeah.
seat of the pants kind of thing with me. All
Yeah.
right.
So that really connects to our topic today. I want to start with just talking about a couple things that we see on the internet and in our culture today. And like your runes, I myself have some tarot decks. Specifically, I have this really nice Steven Universe themed tarot deck. And I've seen a lot of like fandom tarot decks and fandom like spiritual items like candles.
Yeah.
Another thing that I see is the Battle of Hogwarts trends on Twitter every year. Even now that, people are stepping away from Harry Potter, there's still the few holding on.
Yeah.
And every year, on the date that in canon the Battle of Hogwarts happened, people tweet about it to memorialize this fictional event.
Yeah, it's an odd thing, especially when you consider it's like, hey, all these child soldiers in this story killed a bunch of people, and
Yeah.
the writer is a transphobe.
Yeah. Can't forget that part.
Harry Potter in dating apps, like if somebody says I'm a Harry Potter fan, it's almost immediately like a pass for me. Like
Yeah, like a red flag.
if they have a lot of like other stuff, like okay, I like Harry Potter, but I know I get it. I'm like, all right,
Mhm.
I'll give you a chance. But for the most part, it's like I have two indicators of I don't want to talk to you when it comes to this kind of stuff. It's like I'm a person who speaks my mind, and I'm blunt. I'm like, you're just
Mhm.
probably racist and don't want to say you're
Yeah.
racist. And then two, it's
Yes.
like Harry Potter for life. And then or if they have like specifically like if they have the Death Eater tattoo, I'm like, wow, you're a Nazi. I get
Oh,
it. That's
yeah,
fucked up.
exactly. Like, oh, I especially people, and I'm probably gonna offend some people with this, but it's like, come on, we're approaching 30. Um, people who really identify with like Slytherin from Harry Potter,
Yeah.
where they're like, I'm a Slytherin. It's like you're the house that produces all of the evil wizards.
And you know
Like,
that's also as a creative, that is an odd thing to say, or not an odd thing to say. It's like an odd thing to think about, where the houses in Harry Potter are not inherently like a bad thing, and they make
yeah.
sense from a standpoint of like, oh, this is a magical world, and certain like sorts of magic, like your personality defines the magic that you cast in Harry Potter to a certain extent, as far as I'm aware of it, because the fucking rules of magic in Harry Potter don't make any goddamn sense because it's just
Uh-huh.
bullshit. But like from like a D&D standpoint, it where like magic has more rules and there's power exchanges and stuff. You can fit the Harry Potter houses into a lot of different worlds, and they're cool and they make sense. they're just so poorly executed in the fiction that they were created in.
Yeah,
And
like she really was just like brave, smart, evil, and then the other ones.
yeah, well, and that's something too. It's like Hufflepuffs do get bullied a lot, but it's like Hufflepuff is to me the most enduring one because it's the most human one. It's like
Yeah. Yeah.
everybody that's in Hufflepuff's like, yeah, I'm just like a cool person. I'm like a good friend, and the other one's like, I want to use magic to control the world and shit. And it's like
Uh-huh.
Hufflepuff's just like being people. It's the most relatable one to me.
I used to be pretty proud of being a Hufflepuff
You know,
back in my Harry Potter
I
days.
would no longer put it on anything like dating apps, but it's
Right.
it is you know.
And I do like how like there are queer and trans fans of Harry Potter who've kind of reclaimed it. So I definitely give people like that a pass. Not that it's up to me, but there are ways that you can consume media in a smart and healthy way. But I just feel like the majority of like cis het white people on dating apps who have their Harry Potter house in their bio are not doing that.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's just a lot
Yeah,
to deal with.
yeah.
Uh,
But moving on.
yeah. So
Um,
we're gonna talk about Elder Scrolls and D&D pantheons, which are you would think I would know a lot about the D&D pantheons. I don't. I ignore them almost completely and always make up my own as I'm going.
that's
Uh,
funny. I've looked them up and like I've played some Elder Scrolls games too, so I'm not
mhm.
like ultra familiar with them, but I do know that they tend to draw a lot from like real life religions
Yes. Yeah, they're
and parallel real life multi-theistic religions.
yes. That was exactly what I was gonna say is that most of D&D there's I don't think there's any monotheistic um cultures in D&D really, not off the top of my head at least.
Huh, that's
And
interesting.
it's always like a pantheon situation and or pantheon and or animistic where it's like spirits,
Right.
which is my general go-to for creating stuff because it's early days and nobody's really like settling into the monotheistic like even in the new campaign we're running that's heavily religious. The main religion of like the sun worshippers aren't even monotheistic. They're just like, hey, this is our main guy, the sun. We love everything else too. It's just we focus on the
Mm,
sun a lot because it's the coolest.
nice.
and and Elder Scrolls is especially interesting because it covers like it is kind of a weirdly monotheistic but also animistic thing because a lot of
Mm,
the what you'd consider gods are getting into like the backstory of Elder Scrolls. It the gods in it know that they're in a video game in a certain way. It's
what?
such a weird yeah, we'll have to do a whole thing on that, but there's like a book
Absolutely.
there's a book and I think Morrowind. I might be misrepresenting a little bit, but it's like basically like it talks about this stuff like oh I broke through the veil and all these things. And it's basically like the character that wrote the book got through the debug console and started cheating.
No
Yeah,
way.
it's pretty insane. I'll compile something for this. It's very cool.
I have no idea how I didn't know that. We've
But
got to talk about that.
it's very interesting because it makes sense in the lore and it's such a cool thing to explore and what it is. All right, so we're moving on to pop culture paganism, talking about the Elder Scrolls.
Yes, so that's going to be the overarching topic of today is how non-traditional religions and like dabbling in spiritualism I feel like have been on the rise as younger people have moved away from Christianity especially and the religions that they were raised with. So, according to the Fanlore wiki, pop culture paganism is an umbrella term for the transformative use of media in pagan customs and rituals. Pop culture paganism covers a wide variety of activities, such as revering book or film characters as deities, using pop culture figures in religious rituals and media, practicing religions or worshipping deity pantheons depicted in pop culture media, or simply depicting traditional deities as they appear in pop culture media. The consumption and creation of fanish media such as fanfiction and fan crafts can also be an important part of a pop culture pagan's practice. And I read this going through the Snape Wives rabbit hole and I was fascinated. I was like, you know
Yeah,
what? I have seen this on the internet.
I have as well, and my younger atheistic self would be like, "Oh, this is bullshit." But nowadays, I'm just like, "Oh yeah, I get it. That's cool. You can do whatever you want. Like like practice whatever you really want, as long as you're not hurting somebody else." Like this next part, we're gonna cover for a second. As long as you're not
Right.
hurting anybody, you're cool. And it reminds me of a little thing, like the thing that got me into wanting to get runes was noticing nature patterns. Which
Mm-hmm.
I, for a long time, I walked to work, and it's only like a mile, so it wasn't too bad or anything. But I'd walk to work, back, forward and back every day. A total of 2 mile walk. Not bragging or anything. I'm a little better off for it now. Just saying. But there was one like summer night where I noticed like a lot of spider webs everywhere, and I was like, man, that I'm like noticing these spider webs specifically in spots where I'm looking.
Right.
What does that mean? So I looked it up when I got to work, and it's like, oh yeah, you're just like you're noticing these, and it's like kind of linked to wanting to get more creative and stuff. I was like, you know what? I have been wanting to get more into writing and actually finishing something that I've written. Never actually did that, but I wanted to, and that's why I noticed the patterns, and that's what got me into rune readings. Like these are like random patterns that you can interpret.
That's super cool. And that's funny that you say that, and it's funny that we're recording this episode today because last night I had a dream where my grandpa was in it, and he passed away a couple years ago, and I've always felt like he has sent me like signs. And I even remember, like, right after it happened, I saw just like so many signs, and this was at a time where I was way more skeptical, and it almost felt like he knew that I would need to be bombarded with evidence that it was him in order to believe it. And so last night I had a dream where he came to me and he was like, "I've been sending you signs. I think you noticed."
Oh,
Uh,
that's yeah.
it was really cool, and now I'm sitting here and I'm like, oh, and I'm recording my pop culture paganism
Yeah,
episode today.
yeah,
So,
that's very, very. Yeah, we put off recording this like a couple days. A, because I've been working so much, and B, because the
uh-huh.
one time I was like, "Hey, we can record this." We recorded our other show,
Yeah.
the D&D one, and we couldn't even record that full because I had to work so much.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Stupid capitalism getting in the way of our
exactly.
podcasts.
That's why when we eventually get a Patreon, you have to support it so we can record on time.
Yes, please.
All right. So
um
back on topic, the
mhm,
next thing in the notes is something that I have seen, but I don't remember.
mhm.
It says blog posts like how to curse someone in Minecraft and which Steven Universe Diamond Court do you belong to. And the first part is nonsense. It's how to curse someone in Minecraft. It's like I said, you don't hurt people. You don't want to be
Yeah.
cursing anybody ever. It's curses are bad in
Yeah.
almost all like sensible spiritualistic practices. If you curse someone, you're also cursing yourself in the process. Like
Right.
you have to give up something to hurt somebody else. Which if you have the talking in D&D terms, if you got the material components, you go ahead, I guess.
Uh-huh.
But I would never wish harm on someone else, especially through such a wonderful medium that is Minecraft.
If you
Um,
curse someone in Minecraft, do you then get the blowback of the curse on yourself or on your Minecraft character?
because the Minecraft character doesn't have agency, I would say you would get it on yourself.
I think so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But
Minecraft is simply the medium through
yeah,
which the curse is sent.
Minecraft is the medium. That's correct. The next part, though, which Steven Universe Diamond Core you belong to, is kind of neat. It's another exploration of like personality tables, for lack of a better term. Um,
Yeah, so what I wanted to get at with examples like the second one mostly, and with the examples of the Steven Universe tarot deck and stuff like that, is so many of us do tiny things that could be considered pop culture paganism. You hear the definition and you're like, what a bunch of weirdos. Who's doing that? But if you sit and think about it, so many of us have little practices that we do, whether it's, having a Steven Universe tarot deck or visiting a blog about the Skyrim gods, or there's so many little things that you could consider pop culture paganism. And then some people take it to an even bigger degree, like having blogs. where they detail spells that have to do with pop culture, and how to incorporate them into your life. I saw one that was like, how to gain the strength of Captain America. And they weren't saying that you were actually going to be as strong as Captain America, but they were sort of using Captain America as like this deity that represented strength to such a degree that you could look up to somebody like that. Like, I want to take that into my life and be strong like Captain America.
It's interesting that you bring up Captain America because he's my favorite Marvel character.
Really?
Yeah,
He's the only one that I know like nothing about.
yeah, he's such a cool character. Captain America as Steve Rogers, and then as the new Captain America. It's not John Walker. John Walker's the bad one. It's
The actor?
no, it's not the actor. It's
Oh.
I can't remember the Falcon's name.
Um.
This is a problem for me. I always Sam Wilson. Sam Wilson. Okay.
Mm.
So I'm gonna leave all that in because I'm a fool for names. Basically, I'll cut out some
Yeah.
of it, but yeah, it's a thing where like just the embodiment of like what should be the American spirit, and a lot of people will take it like, oh, Captain America's like propaganda, which is kind of true on the surface, but then
Mm.
literally all the good Captain America's like, hey, you're not being like cool, so stop it. It's always like standing up to bullies and going against the general ideas that people have, like fighting against racism and all that, especially like through the new Captain America or Falcon and Winter Soldier, where Sam Wilson becomes
Mm.
Captain America. Sorry, spoilers, but it's been out for a while, and we live in a binge culture. So if you haven't seen it, sorry.
Yeah.
It's been spoiled everywhere. I don't feel too bad about spoilers for that kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
And everybody kind of knew it already, anyways. That was going to be the
Right. Haven't the comics been out for like years?
yeah, and they follow the Marvel Cinematic Universe follows it pretty tightly. But
Yeah.
the idea of Captain America as a symbol, which is explored in Falcon and Winter Soldier, is also kind of into this. It's such a weird thing. It's pop culture paganism in pop culture because the bad guy, like not even the bad guy, he's a decent anti-hero antagonist. I say very loosely the word decent in that. John Walker is basically like after Steve Rogers is Captain America, Falcon continues being Falcon, and he gives the shield back, and that's like the first episode of Falcon Winter Soldier. And they name a new Captain America. The U.S. government does.
Interesting.
And he's a veteran. I don't even think I don't know I guess he would be a veteran. I don't think he's in active duty at the time.
Mm.
But I may be completely wrong. But he's a soldier or a marine, and he does embody like a lot of the traditional like blonde hair, blue eyed American ideals.
Right.
And he becomes an antagonist through the end of it, and he becomes the U.S. agent, which is like kind of an anti-hero, mostly just a dick. But he took on the mantle of Captain America, and like through that gained power, and that power goes to his head. So
which is a pretty timely storyline.
Yeah, exactly.
For them to do. It's funny because I was one of those people who kind of assumed like Captain America is fucking American propaganda, but at the same time, like I it's kind of like those cops who like think that the Punisher is like
yeah
a cop pro cop comic, and if you actually read it,
yeah,
it's like
he's
not that
absolutely
at all.
not. Yeah, and then the lady that writes it is super gay, like super queer lady, right in the Punisher comics. It's very good. But no, even in the first Captain America movie, he's very anti propaganda. And like they give him the super soldier serum, which I wish I could get because I need to be strong very quickly. But they give him that, and then they like send him just to do propaganda stuff, and that's it. And then he like takes it into his own hands to go and do like some good during the war.
Wow.
But
I guess I have to actually watch that movie now.
It's older and more boring of the Marvel movies, but I still love it because, like I said, Captain America is my favorite. I wouldn't say I do pop culture paganism towards him.
Yeah,
but
you're not like
it was very interesting that you brought that up as the first thing because it's like it's a window into me understanding where it's coming from.
Yeah, and it's funny, Marvel, just because of the way some of the comics go and some of the characters, Marvel is a really big topic in pop culture paganism, and lost my train of thought on that, but it's fine.
It's a big topic in pop culture paganism, which makes sense because a lot of their characters either are drawn from or become pantheistic in
Yes.
like Thor and Loki and all them, which we get into a little bit.
We will get
Yeah.
into that a lot.
And but like the Norse pantheon, but there's also other pantheistic characters and some that become pantheistic in like offshoots and their own stories, and it's always crazy. Trying to follow the path lines of some comics is just almost pointless because it doesn't matter. But you get to a point where it's like, oh, none of that mattered because it got undone by this comic. Whoops.
Yeah, I was reading about a comic the other day where one of the storylines was that he gets sent back into the past and he gets to choose whether he goes through his those years knowing what he knows, or if he goes back to his timeline. And then he goes back to his timeline and so much stuff is undone, and I'm just like, that's a lot.
Yeah, that happens to the Flash a lot.
Oh, I can imagine.
So it's interesting to talk about any sort of worship or practice because you get into the topic of whether things are real or not. And it's so interesting to talk about that kind of thing because in the end of the day, if you go home hey, you sit down at your Captain America shrine, you're like, hey Cap, I had a rough day, I need some guidance, and then you think for a minute oh, Captain America tells me just keep being cool. In the end of the day, it doesn't really matter to me personally. It's not hurting anybody. If it's helping you, good for you. As long as you realize that it's part of an introspection thing. You start running into trouble when you start thinking that Captain America is your friend. Where we get back into the parasocial relationships of things. But you can also, without trying to rile too many people up, especially in America here, there are people that are definitely in a parasocial relationship with Jesus. And it's very, very weird.
Yeah, and that brings up an interesting thought experiment where it's there are people who would judge people for being a Snape wife or for practicing any type of pop culture paganism. It's that's not real. And it's well, you get upset when people argue with you that your god isn't real. And yeah, they have different origins, but who's to say that certain ancient religions at the time that they were conceived weren't pop culture paganism to the cultures that were practicing them.
Yeah, exactly. The Bible is a collection of stories. It's like an MCU crossover. The Bible. People don't realize that unless you actually read into it. It's wait a second, this guy's showing up in this part now. Hold on. It's very funny that people don't get that.
Yeah, you could almost, and again, I don't want to offend anybody, and I don't mean to, but I feel you could almost argue that the Bible is fan fiction.
Yeah, I mean, technically it is. It's such a weird thing to think about, especially with the controversy of how many times the English Bibles have been translated and who translated them and for what reason and what they added and what they took out. And that's just a completely crazy theistic, or not theistic, theological debate that it's way too big to cover in our podcast. We're just gonna move on to something else.
Yeah. So there's also a controversy with pop culture paganism, with some pagans denounce pop culture paganism because it doesn't have ties to ancient cultures quote real paganism does, and it can make their version of paganism, which is already kind of struggling for validity in popular culture, look bad. So a lot of them argue for a change in the name of pop culture paganism, and they would prefer for it to be called pop culture religion so that it has no ties to paganism, which I think is fine. And I think a lot of pagans will then go really hard into making fun of pop culture pagans, just because they have been made fun of or singled out for their practices. So they're okay, well, I do this, but at least I'm not that person, They're at least I'm not a Snape wife. So I'm more valid than they are. And I get where that comes from. But I just think at the end of the day, it does more harm than good.
Yeah, it's absolutely a more harm than good situation. I was just stuck thinking of like, why wouldn't they just call it pop culture worship instead? That just makes more sense than
Yeah.
pop culture religion. I just got stuck in loops. Like, man, that makes a lot more sense than because it's not a religion focused on pop culture. It's worship focused on pop culture. That's like semantics. So
Yeah, and I do think that pop culture worship as a catch-all term would make a lot more sense. I don't know why they feel the need to kind of squish it in with paganism when it doesn't need to be, but maybe the people who practice it feel that linking it to paganism lends it more validity. Who knows?
yeah, who knows?
There's so much that you can get into with the semantics of all of
I
this.
am not super into paganism. I don't know a lot of the discourse going on. I kind of always assumed it was kind of like a more anarchic religion where you
Hmm.
just kind of worshipped what you needed to. And some people worship Loki and other people worship other, whatever. Like that, not Marvel Loki, which I know
Right.
people are worshiping Marvel Loki, but
Uh-huh.
like worshiping, they have shrines to different deities or spirits, whatever has drawn them in. And it's I don't know. It's crazy. it's
Yeah.
it's too much. We're so focused on like defining everything that sometimes you just don't need to. It's
Right.
we forget that language is a limiting factor as much as it is a
Mhm.
helper in things.
I
Um,
think some people are looking so hard for community that they're drawing too many lines.
yeah, that happens a lot.
So this is our newest segment on the podcast. I'm going to call it Fandom Term Origin segment. No, I'm not. That sounds horrible. Let's call it Fandom Etymology.
There we go. Yeah.
That works much better. So our first word, we're gonna start out simple. We're gonna start with the word ship. And from an etymological standpoint, it might seem obvious that it comes from the word relationship. But I think it's really interesting to dive a little deeper and figure out exactly where this term in fandom came from. And it was coined on the internet in the 90s due to the X Files. If you watched the X Files in the 90s, or even today, I think it's on Netflix,
Yeah.
you'll know that there's a lot of unresolved sexual tension between the main characters, Mulder and Scully, who also, side note, were my bisexual awakening.
Yeah, I think that's for a lot of people.
Uh-huh. And fans really wanted them to be involved in a romantic relationship, and these fans called themselves relationshippers on the internet. And then eventually this was whittled down to shippers and using the term ship like we do today.
That's super interesting. I didn't know that it started with the X Files, and there's always cases in etymology where it's like, oh, this is the obvious point where it starts from, like you said, comes from relationship, and then you get the little curveball. There might also be like another curveball we don't even know about. It's
Yeah.
super. Maybe the relationship or thing came from something else first, because like you can go back to like Sherlock days, like when Sherlock was first released, where people were doing this sort of fan fiction and stuff. And we've talked about a little bit of like old fan fictions and old fandoms very briefly before with like H.P. Lovecraft and stuff. Actually, did we talk about that on this podcast, or is that just something we talked about? I don't even remember now.
I don't remember, but I do know that in doing research for this podcast, I found that Sherlock Holmes is kind of credited with being one of the first fandoms
Hmm.
ever,
Yeah,
like, documented.
it because it was like we'll save it for the episode. We're not going to talk too much about it because I do know a little bit about like the early fandom rise. But also on a X Files note to end this little segment, I didn't watch much of X Files because I was a child when it came out, and I watched an episode and it made me cry and have nightmares for a week, and I never watched it again. So I need to at
I
some point go
think
and watch it.
I think so. My aunt is a huge fan of the X Files, and I think I've said before that she is sort of. I credit her with my fandom awakening, and I think I watched episodes of the X Files with her when I was like probably too little. Not that it's inappropriate, but I think it gave me my first existential crisis because
Yeah.
I watched an episode where this kid could like travel super fast or something, and then when he was told that he couldn't use his powers or his powers were taken away or something, it just showed the agony of him existing in normal time and how slow it seemed to him, and my young brain could not handle that.
That's one of my favorite speedster tropes too.
Yeah.
Like Captain America's one of my favorite heroes. Speedsters are my favorite type of superhero, and we'll talk about that at some point in the future.
So, the probably the most infamous example that most of our listeners or some of our listeners would be familiar with, if they've been on the internet anytime in the last like 10 years, are the Loki Wives. And these are people who are involved with Marvel Loki, not Norse Loki. Though you could argue that Marvel Loki is Norse Loki. I'm talking about Tom Hiddleston Loki
Yeah.
here. This was mostly found on Tumblr in the 2010s, or, whenever Loki first appeared in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Do you know when that is? Was it Thor? The first
Yeah, it
Thor
was the
movie?
first Thor movie.
Okay.
I believe. I could be completely wrong now that we say that, but I believe Loki was in the first Thor movie. He may have been hinted at in some of the earlier ones, but
It's funny because I saw a post that was looking back at an article that came out before the first Thor movie, and it was talking about how Marvel was casting these unknown actors, Tom Hiddleston and Chris is it?
Chris Hemsworth.
And Chris Hemsworth.
Yeah.
And that's so funny to look at now because that movie just launched their acting careers, and now they're like huge actors and like sex symbols in our culture.
Exactly. I've heard some conspiracy theories about how Kevin Feige might be a time traveler that just knows when exactly to release certain things.
You know what? I might believe that.
That's just a funny little thing. I can't even like begin to search into that. It's just something to think about.
That's hilarious. So the Loki Wives were pretty big, pretty outspoken in their love for Loki / Tom Hiddleston. And I feel like they kind of popularized pop culture paganism. I feel like these people being this into a character in such a unique way really opened the door for people to be like, this is an interesting thing to implement into my life. Maybe I won't go so hard as to say that I want to be married to a character from a TV show, but I feel like this was sort of the rise of these pop culture, like, witchy blogs and communities.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Especially the weird, like, trickle-down effect of Norse Loki into Marvel Loki. And
yeah, it's so interesting, and makes sense that it would come from a kind of already established deity.
Yeah, and the concept of being Loki wives also just kind of makes sense. Thinking of Norse Loki,
right? Like I feel like that was probably a thing before Tom Hiddleston played Loki on TV.
It's definitely something that like Norse Loki be like, yeah, I just got like 200 wives, whatever.
Yeah. But before the Loki Wives, there are the arguably lesser known, though I feel like if you were on the internet at that time, this would be more known. But there were the Snape Wives, which is kind of what outsiders have called them. They called themselves Snapists, and they created...
Hold on. You can't call yourself a Snapist. That's terrible.
There are Snapists.
I cannot. No, I'm gonna bully now. That you cannot call yourself a Snapist. That's just terrible.
Let's stick with Snape Wives then. So this was 2006-ish. The last Harry Potter book had just come out, and a lot of people at this time, right before the book came out, people were arguing whether Snape was a good guy or a bad guy. Like, what are his motivations? He'd killed Dumbledore, spoiler alert.
Yeah, no, they did drive-bys about that. I remember that.
And people, most people were like, wow, I always knew Snape was going to be a villain. But then on the other side, there were people who were like, no, I think there's something going on here, and I think he was probably working with Dumbledore. Turns out those people were right. And when the last book came out, a lot of people, flipped the script and they were like, Snape is a sympathetic character. He was motivated by love, which is just so pure. There were a lot of Snape apologists. No, I'm not gonna say
There were Snape apologists. You're right. I'm leaving that in. Absolutely.
Okay. There were a lot of Snape apologists back in the day.
Because that's actually completely accurate to what happened. Snape was not a good person. He was a Nazi for a long time. He was like a magic Nazi. He was the Death Eaters, and he kept doing that. He kept doing magic Nazi stuff. Like,
yeah, and
he
like
didn't stop.
the whole reason Lily Potter didn't like Snape and stopped being his friend is because he essentially called her the wizard equivalent of a slur.
Yeah, and he didn't love her. He lusted after the idea of her.
Exactly.
Like, he never really got to know Lily. It's terrible. He's a bad person.
Nowadays, now that people are reflecting on the source material of Harry Potter a lot more, there are far less Snape apologists, and most of the Snape enthusiasm just comes from Alan Rickman's portrayal and his great acting.
Yes.
And people who were horny for Alan Rickman with long black hair.
Yeah, Alan Rickman was a perfect Snape, and he actually channeled like him being just a shitty person really well, I think. Alan Rickman's the kind of actor who would like look at it and be like, okay, you have presented me with this script and he is a bad person, so from now on he will always be a bad person, and there's no redemption. Even him killing himself in the end is like barely redemption.
And I think I think they toned it down a little for the movies too, and made it a little more humorous, like his bullying of literal children.
Yeah.
When in the books, he was just like making kids cry, and he was like Neville's biggest fear. So he was a little more sympathetic in the movies too, and there's a lot of fans who just never read the books and only like stan movie Snape.
Yeah.
So these people, you could definitely say they stand Severus Snape. These women, they were all women, believed they could channel Severus Snape, and they believed that they were involved with him romantically and sort of viewed him as their spiritual advisor. So to them, he was an immortal deity on the astral plane, and to explain the existence of the Harry Potter books, they claimed that J.K. Rowling channeled him to write them. Like, he told her to write the story from the astral plane.
Yeah, something from the astral plane got a little muddled in the process, I think. But I can see the thought process. I get it. I don't agree with any part of it. And I think these people were a little bored with their daily lives, probably.
Probably.
But we'll continue, and I'll try not to be a bully anymore. I'm still like just this whole section is like activating my mean side of me, just because
it can come out. Mm-hmm.
Just because of J.K. Rowling, and as someone who. This is such a weird thing to talk about because I'll talk all the time about being a creative person and never actually making anything. So I don't have any ground to actually stand on. But it's like, if you're going to write canon and then go back and say, oh, but this is actually that, like, you can't do that. If you're going to present something, you have to present it right the first time, or shut up.
Absolutely. Yeah, that we should definitely do a whole segment about the concept of death of the author, so we'll get into that someday. I think it's a little more acceptable to lightly bully when somebody's worshipping a problematic character.
It is a lot easier.
And also, there was a little bit of controversy with this, other than people just making fun of them, because one of these women started posting online about how her devotion to Snape was causing her to not have enough time for her children. And she was saying that she needed to leave her religion and that Snape wasn't right for her because she needed to take care of her kids. And it's like, yeah, I think if your devotion to a fictional character is getting in the way of your parenting, that's when you know you need to put it down.
Oh, this is super interesting actually because like uh there's like a weird example of this, and you're gonna have to follow my train of thought here.
Okay.
Have you ever played The Binding of Isaac or seen anybody play it?
I've watched people stream it.
Okay. So in that game, the mother of Isaac, basically, this is such a weird train of thought, but she goes to kill Isaac, like in the classical biblical story, because
Mm,
she's watching like a TV evangelist. And that kind of this
interesting.
part just made me think of the Binding of Isaac. Was like, what terrible things could have happened to children because of Snape? Oh no.
I know.
That it just a weird connection. It's like people do some
Which,
terrible things for like developed religion. I can't imagine some unhinged Snape wife doing some weird shit to their child.
yeah. Which is, weirdly in line with his philosophy in
Exactly.
canon,
Yeah,
so.
that's the thing that got me on. I was like, oh no, I
Yeah.
I cannot.
But other than that, mostly what was going on with the Snape Wives was people making fun of their devotion. They called him Master. They saw him as the one true God. And there were at least three big name Snape Wives who all viewed themselves as sister wives of Snape. One of them, who called herself Lady Darkness, posted marriage vows to him on her live journal and allegedly posted photos of her real life Snape shrine, but those have been lost to time,
Oh no.
unfortunately. So there's no saying if they were real, but I have read accounts of people who claim to have seen the
I
photos.
would love to see that, but I would also hate to see that.
I know.
As with all things that we're going to cover in this show, there's going to come a point where I'm like, I wonder who A believed this and B
Mhm.
who saw gullible people and was like, I could say I believe this and trick other people into actually believing this.
Right. Which I think happens a lot more than people think.
Yeah, and it's super easy to spot when I've been in the situation where I'm like, I kind of got into one of those situations with,
Mm,
I can't even remember what it was. I just had a bad experience talking to somebody. I don't think I was ever, because I was an atheist, I didn't believe in this stuff. I think I just saw
right.
people being harassed by like a internet friend I had, and I was like, this is really shitty, and I don't want to be shitty like this person.
Yeah.
Um, and that's just on ADHD and memory loss. Like,
Uh-huh.
there's some things where I just remember the vague feelings that I have. So sorry in
Yeah.
advance for all the episodes. I'm like, I kind of remember something, but I don't know if it's true or
There's
not.
something kind of happened. On a lighter note of that, a friend of a friend of mine just went viral because somebody posted one of those things that had those like freezy pops. The colorful ones that are just like a stick.
Yeah,
And the caption was, "What do you call these?" And this person quote tweeted it and just made something up. They were like Flingo Jingos. And people believed that and like retweeted it, like, who calls them this? And it was like, nobody. They made it up
yeah,
and you fell for it.
that
And that
is.
happens so much on the
I
internet.
love when that happens because it's always so funny because I
Hmm.
can always spot and be like, that's funny that they trick these people into thinking that. That's a lot less nefarious than making people worship Severus Snape.
Yeah. Yeah, let's not encourage that, but I've always wanted to, like, I don't know, make some dumb shit up on the internet and see who believes it, but
Mhm.
then I stop myself because I'm like, I don't want to be mean.
Yeah, there's a fine line between like Flingo Dingos or whatever
uh
and making a
and
religion.
worshipping Severus Snape and then neglecting your children.
Yeah. So they were all married IRL, but since Snape and his wife's relationship existed on the astral plane, it was okay.
Yes, so they had real life husbands. But since, Snape didn't have a corporeal form, I guess, it was fine. And I guess they were a little bit like, not polyamorous. What's the word for when you
Yeah,
polygamy?
polygamy is the marriage of multiple people. Polyamory is just being
Yes.
in relationships with multiple people.
Right. I guess they were sort of polygamist with Snape.
Yeah, that would be the most accurate description, unless they were like,
Uh-huh.
unless they had multiple relationships outside of these legal marriages. I would say,
Right.
I don't know. It's very muddy waters on that.
Yeah, I don't know that live journal marriage vows constitute a binding legal relationship with anybody on any plane other than this one.
No, I think that it's the real slippery slope right there. Everything else has been
Uh-huh.
pretty cool up until that point.
Yeah. Which I would love to have our friend Palm on the podcast, who is a lawyer and also super involved in fandom. Because when you get into the topic of fandom and law and fan fiction and law, especially, it gets super interesting.
Yeah,
But
there are
that'll be a future episode.
yeah, there are a lot of very interesting things like early fan fiction stuff that got into big trouble, and you had to put certain disclaimers at the beginning of fan fictions.
Hmm.
So it's very very interesting.
And
So
there's still so much gray area with law and the internet, even
oh yeah,
nowadays.
it's I mean law is gray area. That's the whole thing
That's
about
true.
that's like entirely it. But what the fuck's this next part? Excuse me.
So, some of them claimed that Snape would inhabit their husbands' bodies, and this is how they were intimate with their quote master.
Okay, I mean in a theoretical lifetime where I was married to a Snape worshiper, a Snape wife,
Hmm?
and
Hmm.
I wanted to have relations with my Snape wife, I would like, you know what, Snape's all up in this tonight, honey. It's your time. Let's have a good one. And I would just kind of roll with it because I'd be
Yeah,
the
I mean,
supporting husband
what else do you do
up
at that
until the
point?
institutionalizing point,
Yeah, yeah.
and
I mean, you could have worse kinks.
yeah, role play is a thing. I get it.
Yeah.
It's I hope that the husbands consent to this, and they weren't just like after a roll in the hay with their husbands, like, yeah, Snape is all up in you tonight, honey. And the
That was Snape.
husband's like, what are you fucking talking about? Like, what are you talking about? I just the theoretical where that's the best sex that the husband ever had with his wife. That just makes me really sad too. At the same time,
Uh-huh.
that's
I
just
have to feel bad for those husbands.
you
Like, imagine having to compete with a fictional character with your own partner.
you like getting proxy cucked by Alan Rickman is my nightmare. Just in general.
Honestly,
That I
you
can't
can't.
compete. I can't. It's not
Right.
possible.
It's Alan Rickman or Tom Hiddleston,
Exactly.
like all of the Tumblr sexy
And
men.
what am I supposed to do in that situation? Nothing.
Right.
Nothing I can do.
All
Which,
you have to do is be like, I gotta practice my Alan Rickman
as
voice.
an aside, that's all jokes. I don't kink shame. That's if that's your
Yeah,
thing, if that's your thing, have fun with it. The only
all
issue
lighthearted here.
yeah, the only issue I really have with it is like if it's not consensual and they
Right.
like if it's something that the husband has to play into specifically to get the romance and attention that they need in a relationship, that's when you get into like a bad position. And that this
Yeah.
is a very serious discussion where it's like if you have to bend over backwards to receive affection from your spouse, it's not
Right.
good. You're not in a good
Yes.
situation.
Even if it's as outlandish as your spouse is making you compete with a fictional character on the astral plane.
Yeah, it sounds like a joke, but it's very like that's an actual serious thing that I'm sure has come up.
Absolutely. So, yeah, the fall of Snape wifeism sort of happened when their community was found by like the larger Harry Potter community, and they reposted their live journal entries on like a bigger Harry Potter live journal, and people were just going off, making fun of them. Big flame wars were happening. The Snape wives weren't super bothered. They were like, well, you guys just don't even have any imaginations. They were like, I feel bad for you guys that you're not married to Snape. But eventually, this got to be a blight on the community. And then around the same time, one of the big name fans left to worship a character from NCIS. And this was highly controversial because Snape is the one true god. So after that, it just sort of became, something I think people did off the internet.
Was the goth girl on NCIS? Because I could see that happening if she was. I can get behind that. I don't watch any of the CIS shows. I gotta look it up now. If she's NCIS goth chick, yeah, it pops up. Oh yeah, yeah. No, I get it. Abby.
I have never heard of this.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, you haven't seen? Oh yeah, she's actually super cool.
Let me see.
She's like one of the best loved crime fighters on TV, which is a true statement. Abby Scioto.
Oh, I stan.
Yeah, she's super cool. Like
I've seen this woman. I just didn't know this was NCIS.
wait a second. Airing on Tuesday, May 8th, after 15 years. When was this posted? 2018? So she started
Whoa.
being that character in 2003. Holy shit. Anyways,
Wow.
yeah, if they left to worship her, I would accept it. If not, then I get why they got mad.
I believe it was a male
That's
character. Yeah.
Boring.
Yeah, like of all the characters you could worship, some dude on NCIS
Wow.
would not be my first pick.
Also, sorry, Abby super fans, if I couldn't pronounce her last name. I truly apologize. It's hard for me to read.
Yeah, we have ADHD. Here's a fun question. If you had to worship a pop culture figure, who would you pick?
I think it would. It's tough because I was thinking about Captain America, but then I started thinking about the Flash, and like I said, I love speedsters. They're super cool. I also really like Superman as a what is it called? It's like an archetype of the omnipowerful superhero that has to deal with like the fact that they're omnipowerful and holding back against people that aren't. And like the
Hmm.
show and comic Invincible are really good about.
Just started watching that yesterday.
Have you finished the first episode? Because I don't want to spoil anything, but
I have,
okay,
yeah.
the first episode is really good.
Yeah, it
And it
was.
gets better the whole time. I think the animation could be a little better, but overall, it's a
Yeah.
very good show. I'm always super critical of animation stuff, though.
Me too. I'm the type of person who, if I don't like the art style of a animated show, I can't watch the show.
Yeah,
Like I can't. I hate to say it, but I can't watch BoJack Horseman as much as people recommend it to me. I
hmm
can't do it.
that's a weird one too because like so much of it is sight gags on like you have to like it's not just a show you can sit and listen to. You have to like see what the characters are to get some of the
Yeah.
jokes.
Yeah,
Um,
somebody was like, "Why don't you just listen to BoJack Horseman?" And I was like, I mean, that's a lot of like ifs and
yeah,
workarounds just to consume a
yeah,
show."
yeah. A lot of
And now knowing that it relies on being able to see what's going on, it's like that's not gonna work.
Yeah, that's a problem for like other people to figure out. But if
Yeah.
I had to choose, I guess it would be just the Flash. Because like I said, I'm a big fan of speedsters. They grace that line between being the Superman omnipowerful and the Captain America regular guy who gets kind of powerful. And they tap into the Speed Force, like in DC Comics, is an omnipresent universal force.
Really?
Yeah, it's very cool. So
That's a cool like lore thing.
yeah.
I was gonna say, how do you feel about Sonic the Hedgehog?
He's also like a speedster, so I'm a
Yeah.
big fan because it's definitely not. He's not doing that all on physical ability. There's no way he's got spaghetti legs.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
Right.
He has the same lightning effects that speedsters have in a lot of stuff. And another fun thing about speedsters is that each one has a different like color to their speed force.
Interesting.
And in the CW show, and I think in the comics as well, Barry Allen and his wife Iris West, part of the one of the later seasons, they have a child together. And because Iris West was at one point, or like for literally one episode of Speedster, she had her own energy color, and their child that came from the future has like a mix of the parents' colors and then her own color as a Speed
That's
Force. It's super
cute.
cute, and I love it. Um,
Aw.
it's very cool. I love the CW Flash. I love the CW Arrowverse in general, except for Arrow.
I've heard terrible things about that show.
Arrow is like an okay show, but it spawned the Legends of Tomorrow and the Flash, and unfortunately Batwoman, which is also a terrible show from what I've heard.
Mm,
Um,
dang.
but like if you just watch the cool shows, like Supergirl is pretty good too. But a lot of them run into the issue of like they're running out of budget steam, so that the effects get worse.
Yeah,
But that's a
that's unfortunate. Your pick is so wholesome though. Like
yeah.
I don't know who I would pick because I'm so drawn to villain characters. But then I feel like I don't want to worship a villain.
Yeah,
I just
that's the problem with the Snape Wives.
yeah.
It's
Like I'm super into the Darkling right now from Shadow and Bone, just because I'm a villain fucker. Like,
yeah, I get it.
and
I
I'd like
watched
to
the
do
show. I get it.
yeah, I'd like to do an episode about that too, because in recent years there's been so much discourse about like enemies to lovers storylines,
Yeah.
and I get it, but it's so, as a villain fucker, it's so annoying to me. It's like people are like, I like enemies to lovers, but not when it's toxic. And I'm like, then you like rivals to lovers.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
there's a difference.
That's a different trope.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you haven't watched Shadow and Bone, that's what it's called, right? The series?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wait, is that the title of the Netflix series, Shadow and Bone?
Yes.
Okay.
So the book series is called, I think they just call it the Grisha verse.
Which is funny because Grisha is just like Russian for Greg.
Yeah.
Which is that's the only discourse that I've seen from it. It's like,
That
why did she call it the
up.
Greg Force? What's going on?
I think it's because in the series, in the novels, the first guy who could use those powers was called like Gregory, basically.
Yeah, it
and
makes
so they
sense.
just shortened it. But it's just really funny
It's a funny,
think of calling them Gregs.
It is a funny coincidence, but it's like also looking at like the Baptist Church. It's named after John the Baptist. It's the same sort of thing, and it is
Exactly.
it's a super cool like Russian setting, and I really like that. We've gotten completely off topic. We might cut this whole part out. Who knows?
Yeah.
I'll figure it out as I go, or we'll leave it in.
This is what happens when I take Adderall before we podcast.
Yeah, this is what happens when I don't take Adderall. I don't have a prescription to it yet, so hopefully I can get it and we can be on the same level.
Yeah.
But now we're going to enter the closing statements presented by friend of the show, Dr. Phil, in filler words. He doesn't know he's a friend of the show yet, and he hopefully never will. I don't want to be involved in it that much, but
I love Dr. Phil in like a strange sort of I love Dr. Phil in a weird way where I recognize that he's a problematic figure, but just something about his aura and the way he presents himself is so funny and fascinating to me, and the type of people that he draws in is just, he's sort of like a Guy Fieri type figure.
Yeah, he's like evil Guy Fieri.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's exactly it, and he fascinates me.
I have two selected from these ones that you've sent me. Some of them are like, in this one, there are a few, like most of them are like nice and they're sensible statements, but in order in this one that you've sent me, comment goes, "You look like Pablo Escobar." I don't see the picture. I don't know what the fuck he's talking about, but I'm assuming he's dressed up like Pablo Escobar in the picture.
That's funny because this was a picture of him in the hospital room when his first child was being born. So this was a picture of younger Dr. Phil,
that makes
who
no fucking sense.
Apparently looked like Pablo Escobar to this person.
I guess. Okay. Run your fingers through that sweet stash for me, boo. And then the cream of the crop is an image. The user profile picture is a photoshopped Adam Sandler image, and it just says Dr. Phil is a doctor.
Amazing.
Which is just not true. It's simply
just a false statement.
It's just a false statement. He could look like Pablo Escobar. He does have a sweet stash. He's not a doctor.
Not anymore, at least.
I don't know if he was ever. I don't know. I don't know the lore. I don't know the Dr. Phil lore.
I believe it was revoked because of some kind of controversy. I don't remember fully.
We're not going to spread any accidental Dr. Phil slander. Who knows what'll happen?
Yeah. You're right.
Thank you so much, Fern, for presenting the Snape Wives.
Thank you for joining me and getting some fandom education.
This was a wild ride already. This is our other episodes are kind of chaotic. This one goes all over the place. Even with editing, it's going to be pretty crazy. It's also
good luck editing this one.
I don't need luck. I just sit through it and it comes out pretty decent in the end.
You're right. You're a skilled editor. I'm not gonna doubt your
Thank you for saying that. I literally started editing podcasts when I edited the first episode of this one. So,
no way.
Knowing that I did something well on the first try emboldens me to keep doing it.
You absolutely did, because I was afraid I was going to sound like a fool, and you made me sound like I knew what I was talking about. I did want to pose this one last question that I forgot about until just now.
Okay.
And if we already answered it, we can just edit this out. But where can we draw the line between folklore and pop culture? Like, what? That's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, I think that's a good final thought because I have no idea. I think we'll leave that as an endpoint here, and we'll go into we'll see you later. My God, that doesn't make any sense. Well, and we'll go into going out and leaving the podcast. Holy shit.
We'll leave you with that question to ponder. If we have a platform where you can leave comments, leave us your comments on what you think about this topic, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, Toby, for joining me.
Thanks for having me. We're gonna go through some of the end credit stuff. We have music now for our intro and outro. Thank you so much to my good friend Chris Spectrum Branch. He made this song for me 5 years ago when I started streaming.
Wow.
And I use it for loopings and stuff, and I have the legal right to use it. So it fits this podcast so well. So thank you so much for that, Chris. And you can find his music at Midnight Laboratory on Spotify, and it's a lot of very, very chill beats and cool stuff. A lot of experimental things. Thank you to who can we thank for all this information? Snape. Yeah, thanks, Snape, for spawning all this bullshittery.
Thank you to the Fanlore Wiki again, and the Hobby Drama subreddit has a lot of good information and links to help me research these podcasts, so go check those out.
And thank you, Acast, for being our podcast release platform finally. It is hopefully set up by the time we do this. If not, we'll do that later. But we will be launching all of our podcasts through Acast, which has other great shows like Dungeons and Daddies and other ones. But that's the one I've been listening to the most lately is Dungeons and Daddies, hosted by
Dungeons and Daddies.
It's so good. You have to listen to it. It's a very good D&D podcast.
I absolutely will. I'm always looking for new D&D media.
It's so good. So we'll play our outro music now, and we'll see you next time.
Bye!